So as I mentioned last time, it was puzzling to me that the Facebook groups and a few YouTube channels where philosophy was the main theme, always struck me as curious that people in those groups couldn't wait to tell you how wrong you were and couldn't wait to do it so quickly. Because, again, there seems so much hero worship about their particular god, whether it is Camus or Nietzsche or Peterson, for fuck's sake. But it highlights the point. Like Nietzsche, for me, I think I've read The Antichrist and I've read bits and pieces and I've read around him, not really read his books, but this is the thing about philosophy. It seems that the utility or the purpose or the gain is just to read them and try and understand them as an exploration of what's possible, what's the meaning. What does it even mean to ask the question? And then what does it mean to ask the question? And it can just keep going on and on. It seems an inductive process in some ways. It doesn't start with a premise of what's true, therefore what can we learn from that? It kind of asks, if we suppose this, what are the implications of it? I even looked at a meta-analysis on Nietzsche's work. This is when I was reading into Contempt, and someone had analysed a lot of Nietzsche's work, and they'd used like keyword analysis and sentiment analysis, and they'd looked for like the main themes in his work, and it's interesting to see how the themes of Nietzsche's work changed over time. It's a beautiful exploration, and even there's meaning in the meta-meanings. It's quite remarkable. It's like, evolution, whereby the change in frequency of alleles is the marker of change over time. And when we see certain traits that survived and certain traits that died out, i.e. the allele frequency change, it tells us that there was some environmental or circumstance that acted as a pressure on those genetic traits, such that some were useful to survive and others were either a hindrance or not. And so as a result of this and genetic analysis, we can plot out all these clades and see what animal belongs in what clades, because it carries certain traits and certain allele frequencies through this map of history. And so we can trace things back to common ancestors. I wonder if such a kind of big, massive meta-study has been done on the entirety of philosophy, but it was certainly interesting looking at how Nietzsche's focus changed over time. I wonder if other philosophers have a similar change over time, or whether each philosopher's change over time is different. So the profile of Nietzsche's work suggests that he got started and didn't really mention many of these concepts that were looked for. The ones that were measured for were contempt, laughter, curiosity. Were almost equally present in the big works, the works that Nietzsche is famous for. The meta-analysis reveals, interestingly enough, that it was about across these major works, contempt as a keyword search across contempt, laughter and curiosity was about a third represented. Laughter perhaps a bit more than a third, and curiosity perhaps only, by looking at the charts, 10 to 15%. So it seems that he was laughing with contempt. Does that summarise Nietzsche? Well, yeah, maybe. Interesting. Anyway, I'll probably do a separate audio on contempt and definitely a separate one on forgiveness. Interesting concepts. But of course, relevant in terms of interpersonal communication. I only mention this because, as I say, from my limited understanding, philosophy is an investigation of almost the meaning of words or the meanings of concepts, or what can be gleaned from them, or what does it mean? Where does that take us? What other questions can we ask? And so it's just an endless investigation into meaning. And whilst it's nice to have the time to do that, and I suppose can make you a very rounded and worldly individual, certainly riding the coattails of great thinkers who had a lot of time to think this stuff through, and through the history of time themselves having been selected as, survivalist, in the sense that bad philosophy or debunked philosophy or stuff that isn't actually philosophy but sound like it has been forgotten by the wayside, and only these greats that are revered or actually have good utility and value upon which a lot of other stuff is based survive. And because of that, I suppose it's tempting that we can put these people up as heroes. But I always remember, if Nietzsche didn't think of it, someone else eventually would have, and it would bear their name. But of course, in the Western world, in English-speaking countries anyway, it's not just Nietzsche in it, because it needed translating. And there you go, there's all that stuff, because I understand some words in German that don't immediately translate directly into English. Schaffenfreude. Wanderlust, of course, we recognise a strong desire to travel. Erbsenzahler, someone who is obsessed with details and a bit of a control freak. Why do I know that one? Yeah, but there's quite a number of words like that. And so when you translate them into many words, context and subtlety and nuance, it gets dragged with it. So this even happens in our interpersonal communication. Person A has a meaning in their mind that they wish to convey. They speak it aloud. They may not be entirely accurate, or the context might be slightly off, or they might think what they've said is what they mean. Somebody else hears it, has selective hearing, has a perception filter, might hear the words slightly differently, or imagine they heard words, or insert words, or pick up things from the tone that may or may not have been meant, and then they'll warp that a little bit, and then they'll do a translation, and they'll internalize their own meaning of what the other person said. So it's the old model that's offered in NLP. The meaning of the communication is the message received, not always the one sent. Of course, the model's more complicated, but because sometimes we don't say what we mean, but we hope people will understand what we mean and read between the lines. Perhaps we're too embarrassed, or we don't want to be totally honest, or we want them to get it without us actually saying it. Oh, it just gets so complicated. Sometimes life experience, we've had a bad go, or something's gotten us down, we're low on energy, and we're not exactly sprightly with our words, and we're not exactly paying attention to be accurate. And this is where the empathy comes in, because the other person can pick up on this and help the first person by exploring their own thoughts. Never let it be said that I'm good at sales, because I suck. But it seems to me that exploring sales, the process is of acknowledging and understanding people's perspectives, acknowledging and understanding their decision strategies. And then I suppose once you know these kinds of things and what's important to people, the kind of motivational interviewing can come into play, where if someone is well disposed, attentive and receptive, you can help them explore their decision tree that they perhaps haven't made clear yet. They have new things that have come to light, or they're experiencing new things about life that they're unsure about, or there's a new business proposition, or there's a new opening in the market, and they haven't actually had time to think about it. I mean, this is one of the main rebuttals to a sales question for an order. I'll have to think about it. And there is at least a few trains of thought, a few schools of thought regarding sales, is that if that's what a prospect says, you haven't asked good enough questions to dig down and discover their decision tree that will either result in them in saying, actually, you know what, now that I have thought about it and you've helped me and we've dug through it and these are the consequences and this is the upside, for the price the answer is no, or for whatever reason the answer is no, and that's fair enough. Conversely, if the answer is yes, well, that's the one we want. But that's all good too, and this is persuasion, the process of inducing others to give fair, favourable or undivided attention to propositions. It's almost like a philosophy investigation, a philosophy of mind, or a searching of epistemology. And again, I come back to Peter Boghossian and Anthony Magnabosco. Anthony Magnabosco does the street epistemology, and he'll challenge people's deeply held beliefs, but only in a voluntary basis. That person is free to leave at any time, and he asks permission up front, and that's another important thing too, getting permission. And he stops when they say, you know what, I don't know. Because all he's doing is making space for people to discover new thinking. So you can imagine you've held this belief, whatever it is, prana, karma, God, ghosts, that forced equality is useful or that it isn't, and you don't have any facts, data or evidence to back it up. It's, I'm going to say, just a belief. And I say that to minimize the fact that, we can hold beliefs for no reason. And so they're easily installed. But what he does is he asks a series of questions that gets the person to say, you know what, now that I think about it, I don't actually know that it's a worthwhile belief or not, and I'm open to thinking about it some more. And he won't say any more. He won't induce them in one direction or another. And I think, again, when we're doing, say, personal communication or therapy or counselling, we should be clean with language and let the client decide what they want to put there. Obviously, in sales, you want to put there what's perhaps mutually advantaged, let's put it that way. The other issue, especially in interpersonal dynamics, is we get all these long-term effects that distort our language. So we might be, I mean, this is another thing, it's like on Facebook, we go there to tell our friends lies. Certainly on Instagram, but on Twitter, we go there to tell strangers the cold hard truth. Because there's no comeback. These are strangers, you blame them or you have a go at them or you set them right, and then you can just walk away from the conversation. And that's why I think it's a pile of shit, because the engagement is so low. I mean, how can you ask? I mean, even some of the questions, like, tell me 3 things that I ought to do for you, 3 things that I ought never to do for you. And that kind of response, I don't even know if it can be articulated over Twitter, but I don't know whether anyone's going to take the time even to type that out. In interpersonal relationships, it's like, I don't want to upset this person because I've got to go to bed with them tonight. I've got to sleep in the same room. And it can be a bit uncomfortable, so we take shortcuts and we phrase our questions in ways that we think the other person might be more open to answering, or we hope that they'll understand what we're really asking. So sometimes I suspect there is fear of retribution, and sometimes it's very difficult to be honest about things. And a lot of times, again, I come back to these 419 scammers that I've listened to for far too many hours on YouTube, is when they lose their patience, when they're not getting what they want, they go into rant mode. And the rants, I suspect you could pin them down to quite tight geographic locations. There certainly seems to be a different style of ranting around the world, and it's not anything to do with the location. It's obviously a reflection of the parenting style, which is perhaps a reflection of the culture. So it's certainly telling where male-dominated cultures have installed a particular type of rant, because when you listen to the rant, it's very different whether the rant is targeted at a man or a woman, which is, again, quite telling of the culture from which the ranter belongs. And when I hear these sad breakdowns, I can only think, my God, this is all they ever heard as a child, and this is how they experienced life as a child. This is what their parents said to them all the time. This is where they got it from. This is where they learned it. So in some ways, again, it's always a reflection that when people are guarded or they're trying to hide something, you start to learn by the mask that they're wearing. It's almost as good as telegraphing what they're trying to hide. And this is what Francis Bacon was talking about, that Bepiat called in the biography, that after a while you get so attuned to meeting many different people from many different cultures, because you travel both metaphorically and literally, that after a while it doesn't, the selection in the mask of the wearer tells you all you need to know about the person. So even the mask itself starts to signal what's underneath. Yeah, fascinating. So there's an example right out of the book, Listen Well, which, as far as I can tell, is a summation of what I've learned to recognise as nonviolent communication and motivational interviewing, with a little bit of sales thrown in, a little bit of communication theory. And the example is given that 2 people living together, one of them looks like they're getting ready to go out for the evening, and the other one is not a going out type of person. So we'll call person A the one who's ready to go out, and person B the one who wants to stay in. So person B is thinking, I love you and I really miss our having time together. I was hoping that tonight we could just stay home together and have time to talk and maybe do some other stuff a bit more intimate. How is this expressed? Are you going out? Or even worse, you're not going out, are you? Which has an accusatory tone about it, and I've also heard it expressed as, don't you think it's a bit late to be going out at this time of night? See, these are all judgments and worries expressed. So the first one, are you going out? Person A might pick up on the insecurity and feel manipulated by that. It's like, I start to feel guilty now living my own life because I have to second guess what person B is thinking all the time. You're not going out, are you? Implies that they ought not to be, and that if they are, they're being naughty. And the third one, you're not going out at this time of night, are you? Implies something a little bit, well, what are they saying? That, you're a person of the night, or it's not that, it's not normal to go out at this time of night, or that this is somehow inappropriate behaviour, or they're kind of putting, they're trying to sanction your behaviour. So none of these gets the response that person B was really thinking. Because it's not explicit, it's very ambiguous. Person A hears the words, puts their translation on it, does an interpretation, and derives meaning. And there's so many meanings that can be inferred. And I've mentioned in all the audios that it used to wind me up something chronic when partner, better half, would say thingy, thingy, thingy all day long. And I'd be trying to make meaning of what they meant because I have a high value on communication. So I couldn't leave it. I had to try and work it out. And by the end of the day, it's pretty exhausting. And the only alternative for your own sanity is to stop listening, or they have to become more specific. Pick one. Now I realise now that I could have perhaps expressed that a bit better. So this notion of empathy seems to express the requirement that the meaning that's broadcast from, in this example, person A, and the meaning interpreted or concluded or derived by person B is as close as the original meaning as possible, but it goes through an outbound conversion across a channel, distorted through time and space, incident in someone else's ear that gets converted, translated, bastardized, selected hearing with bias, reinterpreted, and then a derived meaning which may not be the same. So I think the test is whenever we hear something that seems at odds with the person who we kind of recognise that they are. My partner isn't controlling, why are they suddenly asking a controlling question? Or my partner isn't accusatory, why is this statement got a feel of accusation about it? We can perhaps stop and think, maybe there's many meanings to this, and then start our inquiry. Now, I've done this in the past, and it infuriates me that the other person, the partner, was also a so-called trained communicator. And when I express this notion of their language being ambiguous and I don't understand and I need to ask more questions, or can they please be more clear about what they meant? A response I get is, you know what I meant, stop playing stupid games. And then it's like, okay. Anyway, the point is to find out whether our understanding is accurate rather than merely assuming it is. And I think on the basis that all assumptions should be discarded, we should hold as a presupposition that any meaning or inference that we jump to first is likely wrong. And then it behooves us always then to make greater or further inquiry about our assumptions, which means that we always have to be aware that we need to make time for other people, that we always need to make this allowance, because sometimes if foot's out the door, you get asked this question and you don't want to do a 10-minute explanation because the cab's waiting and the meter's running and time is money. So I suppose making time or allowance for communication seems to be a step in the right direction, because I think people are too busy, too quick to jump to conclusion and want to move on. So this is why I start leaving all these groups, because there's no desire even for engagement. I don't know whether it's because they're a bit self-conscious or they don't want to be shown up to be wrong and then it's recorded on the internet forever. Or whether they just don't know, or whether they don't want to know. But the conversation degrades so quickly, and it takes a lot of work, a lot of skill to keep it on track. And at the end of the day, you've got to sort of evaluate, why am I getting so involved with strangers online? So for the longest time, even my short stint in the corporate world, some of the largest institutions, so-called tier 1 banks, as they refer to them, just about every meeting, every business plan, every project plan, every directive was so ambiguous. And sometimes that's how it works out. I cost the bank $1 million once through an ambiguity about a line space, believe it or not. But this is how it happens, and also, the level of specificity that we have to go down to, because they said they wanted this data points on this line, and then on a new line, they wanted these data points. Now, in computer speak, new line is not the same as carriage return line feed. So new line was a bit ambiguous, but I wasn't talking to a techie. So when I did carriage return line feed, it's not what they wanted. It didn't work. What they needed apparently was line feed, and because of this little error, they got pissed off and said, "Don't bother sending us anymore." And what they meant by that was close down the business. That was some time ago. I think that was right. Anyway, details. But this is it. Details, faded memory, and so on and so forth. And it wasn't written down. It was all done over the telephone. So yeah, clear communication, a commitment to make space to have time to talk, and the acceptance that errors are almost baked into the system, and therefore we ought to make time to recognise that at least we need one check to come back by someone saying, "Okay, I hear that these are the words that you said. I'm a bit ambiguous about the meaning. Can we have 2 minutes just to get that cleaned up?" Somehow people seem to find this resentful, and it's always puzzled me. It's like, "No, you should understand what I've said." It's like, "I should? Oh, okay." Yeah, there's sarcasm again. And then, there's other things as well. The level of specificity required. When we're talking about doing projects or making agreements, we can talk about the words, the meaning of the words, the actual line number that it's on, that is a reference point. How far detailed do we need to get? Well, I might argue that you need to go as detailed as you need to go, such that you can say whether it met specification, yes or no. From the speaker's point of view, though, of course, if we are going to be empathic listeners and we make the commitment to clarify our understanding of what they've said, it demonstrates high value on the communication. It demonstrates high value on wanting to understand them, demonstrates that they are of high value to us. You matter, and I'm willing to invest time to get to understand you. I can understand as well in business that this might be seen as a kind of benchmark or a heuristic whereby we don't need to get so specific in our contracts because you are the only one that's actually expressed an understanding of what we're trying to do here. You're the only one who's expressed a genuine interest, and through the level of inquiry and the persistence of wanting to understand meaning about our expression of what we're trying to achieve, even though we may not absolutely hit it, and we may not be able to write a 5,000 page contract specifying every last detail down to the shape of the bolts. At least you're above the competition in that, and we need somebody. So I can see sometimes how that, if you're comfortable that the person you're bringing in is always going to work with best intentions, that they bring a level of expertise and an ability and a level of aptitude that's beyond anyone else, then there is no second choice. So both parties get something out of it, and so it's surely a worthwhile skill to learn and develop. And I think ultimately it comes down to acceptance and compassion, forgiveness. We've talked, well, I haven't done it yet, but I've got the script written for about 3 hours on forgiveness and the process and what's important and what's going on, and another one on contempt as well, which seems to be the opposite of when things go wrong. So I thought it was important to explore those, but acceptance seems to be the big one, is the Kubler Ross model. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. Yeah, okay, I've said it before, the literature doesn't really support it, but it's just a pattern that's observed, and it certainly seems consistent on things like choosing beggars and other Reddit forums. Seems consistent pattern in things like Tinder conversations where it all goes wrong, and where the final stage of acceptance isn't gone into, it usually results in an insult and then the person going back to denial, and then the cycle starts again. So really, I think past the bargaining stage or into the depression stage, you have to come to peace and accept. Might not be fair, this is life, and I am now at choice point. I can either play that game change myself, change the circumstance, or go back into denial and not change and resist even more. And then next time it'll just be the same old cycle. Certainly seems to be a required amount of contempt to do that, either self-conceit or contempt for the world. Again, it's not to be held as law or anything that Kubler Ross, that's it. It's an awareness again that there seems to be stages. Sometimes they come in different orders to a later or lesser degree, sometimes so clearly that this is definitely Kubler Ross, and sometimes so lightly that they're barely detectable. Interestingly as well, I think sometimes people, in reaction to these kind of life events that induce a shock or go through this process, if they can't reach acceptance or don't go back into denial, it's like a limbo of, I think what Pink Floyd were referring to as comfortably numb. And then a depression, I suppose, can set in. Yeah, and all the stuff that goes with that. The needs are not being met. People feel sad. And of course, over a long period of time, seems to lead to poor decisions or no decisions, which just seems to exacerbate the situation. And then it's not just feelings of sadness, it really is depression. Yeah, so acceptance is a big thing. I'm still kind of formulating my ideas about tolerance. I find tolerance an uncomfortable word. I think it's better if we can to build an agreement, because tolerance is just where two people put up with things that neither of them want. They tolerate each other, and there's no, this is just putting distance between each other and putting up with it, rather than turning around and say, okay, how can we change? What can we get together to do that's going to be creative? And it's a refusal to look at it that way. So I don't like tolerance. I think tolerance is a mistake. And certainly this kind of zero tolerance policy is of that ilk. You're going to do it our way or else. And I'm not sure how that ever leads to good things.